introduce her first, Mina, Director for Natural Resources Governance Institute in Lebanon. Happy birthday, Laurie. I wanted to get all our viewers in before we said that to you this morning.
Thank you. That's nice of you. So today you don't get to ask me the hard questions. You ask me the easy questions, and hopefully I'll be focused.
When we're talking about Lebanon, that's going to be tough. But let's see. We'll give you some leeway on your answers. Put it that way. So happy birthday! I'd like to welcome also Mr. Neil Atkinson, former head of Oil Markets Division at the IEA. First time on our program. Welcome, Neil. Good morning. And good morning, Sarah Akbar, Chairman and CEO of OilServe Kuwait and Non-Executive Director of Petrofac. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. And I see that Irene has put up our survey question from earlier this week, where we got quite a surprising result. And Sarah, I'm going to go to you on that actually first. 68% of our audience said that oil producers would actually like to see $100 oil, which is contrary to some points of view. Where does Kuwait stand, and where do you stand on that?
Well, my dear, good morning to all of you. So as oil producer, we definitely like $100 oil and even $200 oil. But is that sustainable? Is that good for our economies? I don't think so. Is it good for the world? I really don't think so, because the world will struggle with the $100 oil, especially at this point in time that we are coming out of a pandemic. So is it real? Is this price real? Is it a result of this sudden openness of almost of the economies? And is it sustainable? These are the questions. But if the question is if we like it, yes, we do like it as a price, but it's not good for us. It's not good for anyone.
Well, I mean, it's obviously good for producers from a revenue point of view, but the argument is that that type of price range starts to really annoy your consuming customers and obviously bring on other participants on the supply side. But, you know, the world, you could argue, is in the middle of a sort of an energy crisis at the moment in terms of supply, whether it's because of logistics or fundamentals. And yet OPEC have chosen so far not to act when they have extra capacity. Why is that?
Well, you know, it's because they already struggled to agree the plan. So to open it up again and try to change things, I don't know how successful they will be. So I think from that perspective, they'd like to keep the plan they had, the agreements they have in place, and just move as the market. And I'm sure, you know, in their back of their mind, they are thinking, is this temporary? Is this a spike in the market, or there are other elements that play into this? And going by the fundamentals that they build the plan on, they haven't seen much change. So I think that's the point.
Thank you, Sarah. Neil, I'll go to you with the same question, please, on supply and on OPEC, which is the party that seems to have the only spare capacity at the moment to add to the market. And some of its members don't have any spare capacity. They're failing to even meet their current quotas. So give us your take on the supply angle and whether you think OPEC should be adding more oil into the market today?
Well, I agree largely with the line that Sarah's taken. When you look at the fundamentals, what we're looking at here is that demand as we move into 2022 is likely to fall back for seasonal reasons. We're already seeing a slackening in the pace of the demand growth that we've had in 2021. And on the supply side, we've got planned increases from the OPEC plus countries, which have been announced and are in place well through 2022. And on the other side of the supply picture, there are some signs of higher production as we move into 2022 from the US, from Canada, from Brazil, and one or two other places. And the balances that I've been looking at recently would suggest as we move into 2022, we are going to see a surplus of supply over demand, as opposed to the surplus of demand over supply that we've had in 2021. So I've thought that the recent ramp up in prices that we have seen, sure, and people have talked about $90 and $100 a barrel, I think that is not based on a careful analysis of the underlying fundamentals, and it's all wrapped up in the understandable fears we have about logistics, about inflation, and about potential shortages. Finally, I think the OPEC Plus agreement has so far been a great success, despite the occasional strains, which Sarah mentioned. But we should remember, and you used the phrase in your remarks, Diala, we're not talking here about OPEC doing things. We're talking about OPEC Plus doing things. And OPEC Plus means Russia. And that is an added complication to the traditional calls on the OPEC countries to increase production. I think if they see the need for more oil because the market is overheating and high crude prices are thought to be damaging to the global economy, they will, if they can agree, supply more. But we'll have to wait and see what happens at their meeting at the beginning of November and early December as well.
Well, I mean, you mentioned high oil prices damaging potentially the global economy. A lot of people are blaming oil prices for the current inflationary pressure that we're seeing sort of filter through across the world, particularly in Europe. Would you agree with that, or would you say there's other factors at play which are sort of pushing the inflation that we're seeing?
Well, I don't want to take up too much of the time here, but I think there are a lot of other factors, not just in the oil market. We're seeing natural gas, we're seeing coal, we're seeing the price of labor increasing in many sectors of the economy. We're seeing the cost of moving goods around the world increasing because of bottlenecks. There are an awful lot of forces, and the oil price is just one of many.
Laurie, good morning again. Just to go to you and to talk a little bit about, fuel and gas and crises, and there's no shortage of those in Lebanon today. First, where are we at with the power crisis in Lebanon? Of course, that's totally a domestic issue and not necessarily being impacted by what we're seeing, across the world in terms of energy prices, etc. But on the mechanics of that internally, are we seeing any hope in sight of that being resolved in terms of power cuts and power supply?
Definitely, there's no hope that this will be solved anytime soon. And definitely what is happening around the world with the oil prices is affecting kind of the crisis in the country, because at the end of the day, we need to buy the fuel. And every time the oil prices are increasing now in the market, this puts more pressure on the government to find money and to find more money to be able to buy the fuel to secure electricity. So therefore, definitely, this is a domestic issue that hasn't been solved for 20 years. And now we're seeing the consequences of that. But definitely, we have a problem with the shortages of dollars in the country and to buy fuel. And therefore, the government needs to look at what's happening in the global market to have at least a plan of where the prices are going, how much money it needs to secure to buy the fuel, so that we could go back to having a couple of hours of electricity. Because unfortunately today, the ambition is not anymore to have 24/7. Our ambition is like to have at least 5, 6, 7 hours of electricity, or increase it maybe to 10 hours, so that if we are complementing it with the private generators, we don't have to pay much for the private generators, because today the price of the diesel is not subsidized anymore. Therefore, the price of paying for the private generators is really increasing and above what people can really afford. So you're ending in a situation where the government is unable to provide you with electricity. The government doesn't have enough money to buy the electricity, and then the generators are really increasing the tariff, and it is becoming very costly to pay for your bills. Therefore, you will have people that live their days and they will have hours where they don't have electricity at all. So imagine in 2021 not having electricity at all, and what does that mean for your life, and for not about connectivity, not about like talking about the internet connection cutting and being cut off the world. So that will have implications on your work. So that is like kind of, what does it say about the economy, suffering economy, about health, about food that is being rotten in the houses. So it has like really bad implications, and but it is going to be ongoing. and not to be solved soon, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I mean, it sounds like the only solution there is if Lebanon gets some money into its coffers, regardless of the price. I mean, whether the price is $80 on the market or 40, Lebanon can't afford the fuel at the moment. So where is it at with its rescue initiative, let's say, from the IMF and the talks there? We've had a new government come in a few weeks ago. They've obviously got a lot on their plate, but where are those negotiations internally, if you like, preparing to be able to attract any kind of rescue package from the likes of the IMF, so that it can then eventually obviously resolve its electricity problem, be able to buy energy?
So actually, there are two tracks. There is the track that the government is trying to come up with a solution now, or with a plan with the IMF. And there are discussions, but we haven't seen the fruits of that. It will be a bit long. At the same time, the government, because many parties in this government are not interested in reforms, because reforms go directly against their interests. So they're trying to highlight the issue of humanitarian crisis, so that money comes in to solve this humanitarian crisis, and then it will remove a bit of the pressure from the government to take action and solve the crisis that is existing. So this is kind of like, we pretend that we're doing that we are like really trying to find a plan with the IMF, secure money for the humanitarian crisis that is happening, because now supposedly we are going into elections in March 2022. So this is like a couple of months away, and no political party wants to take hard decisions regarding employment, regarding increasing taxes, removing subsidies when there is election season, because this will be really hard on them. So they will try to push and push until they get to a place where the humanitarian aid that will come will be sufficient enough to hold people in place and not to be angry, and to go to election and vote for these people. And then after that, they will think what they want to do. I think this is the plan that they have, which is not a very rosy plan.
It's sounding a bit like America. They kind of get into a stalemate ahead of any midterm elections next year. Sarah, I'd like to go back to you and talking about aid to Lebanon. And of course, the Gulf has been traditionally a big part of that, and I'm sure will continue to be. But then we have a story today on our bulletin about Gulf fiscal break-even prices, with what we're seeing now with oil and healthy oil prices, and that in 2022, that these are going to drop, given the healthy sort of revenue that we're seeing today. So give us your take on that, whether you think that is. I mean, Russia's always had an easier time within the OPEC Plus group in terms of its budget with regards to oil revenue. What's happening in the Gulf now? Everything looking a lot more rosy.
Well, it's history repeating itself, I guess, because every time.
We've lost Sarah's connection. Okay, we seem to have had an interruption in Sarah's.
When things,
Sorry, Sarah, we lost you there. We lost you there for a minute. Can you just start again? Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, I don't think the fiscal break-even price is going down anytime soon. For a simple reason is that the budgets for this region is not going down, it's going up. Yes, the revenues are going up because of the oil price. And for Kuwait, for example, it's like $87 that we need as a break-even price. And the Gulf, it varies. Some countries are less, some countries are more. But at this development phase of these countries, I don't think that fiscal price will go down anytime soon. So that assumption that you see in that paper, I don't think it's really valid, because population increasing, we have some of the highest fertility rates in the world, in this part of the world, more people coming to the job market, you have to create more elements in the economy to absorb these people, and that means the government has to spend more in order to create those alleys for people, and therefore the budgets and the requirements for expenditure will not come down. And no matter how much the oil price will go up, yes, these increases in the revenue, but the costs are increasing at the same time, and the break-even prices you see not going to come down. I don't think so.
And big expenditure plans, as you said, in the Gulf. Neil, to come back to you, let's talk a bit about sort of demand forecasts. I mean, we've talked a bit about supply and OPEC, and you know, your comment earlier was that in 6 months' time we're going to have plenty of supply, no problem. Of course, that depends on, you know, what's going to happen with demand in the next 6 months. So let me go to you on that. I mean, the IEA, your former employer, would usually be screaming at the moment at OPEC to sort of open the taps because of prices and protecting consumers. But, you know, with that comfortable situation that you portrayed earlier, demand in 6 months' time, concerns about Asian demand, China's not doing too well. How's the market approaching that?
Well, when I was head of the oil division at the IEA, we never screamed at anybody. We always asked politely and made constructive suggestions. But I take your point. In fact, the IEA has actually recently come out and suggested that the OPEC Plus countries should increase output. And indeed, they've also suggested directly to Russia that it should increase its output of natural gas. But we'll leave that aside for a moment. No, based on the demand, the current demand outlook, as I said earlier, the pace of demand growth, the pace of demand recovery is easing. It's already easing, and that's, I guess, quite natural because we've rebounded from the terrible lows we saw in 2020 at the peak of the pandemic. All the indicators are that a lot of economic activity has returned to fairly close to normal levels in many countries. So it is inevitable that that pace that we've seen in 2020 and 2021 cannot be maintained. Meanwhile, on the other side of the balance, as I said, we have these planned production increases. And I've assumed for the purposes of looking into 2022 that the OPEC Plus countries will continue to implement their current plan. If it changes, it changes, but they will implement their current plan. Meanwhile, there is some sign that production will grow again in the US and indeed in one or two other countries. Therefore, when you add up the numbers, it seems to me that we are heading into a situation where the market is easing. But there's a big but here, that during the peak winter season in the Northern Hemisphere, if there are continued stresses in the natural gas market, we could see a big increase in the volumes of oil that are diverted to be used in the power generation sector, primarily in Asia. And the estimates vary as to what that could be, because it depends what temperatures you put into your model. But people are talking of up to 1 million barrels a day of extra demand from the power generation sector for diesel and fuel oil if we get really low temperatures. So that is a big factor. But of course, we're better off forecasting weather, frankly, than we are the oil market. So we'll have to wait and see what the weather does.
Well, on the natural gas crisis, and Europe, of course, is being particularly hit hard at the moment. I mean, in terms of also, from a hoarding perspective, let's say, how much are gas and oil prices being driven today by sort of the sentiment of, oh my gosh, we're going to have a very cold winter, or actual physical hoarding on the ground?
Well, modeling sentiment is very difficult, and this is one of my beasts at the moment about the current state of the oil market. The fundamentals say one thing, I think, but then you've got sentiment because of these fears of the spillover from the problems in the natural gas market and the coal markets. So the hoarding, not quite sure what we mean by that, because as far as Europe is concerned in particular, stocks are at lower than normal levels as we move into the winter heating season. In the UK, stocks are almost non-existent because of policy decisions that have been taken to essentially eliminate the domestic storage of natural gas. The UK is exposed because it is very heavily dependent on imports. Europe will compete, of course, for LNG cargoes where those are available and where they can be processed in Europe. But it's competing against the mighty buying power of the Asian economies, particularly China, which, as we have seen in recent weeks or recent days, has said that it will pay whatever it takes to secure supplies of resources. And when you're up against buying power like that, which is exercised in the way that it is by China, then clearly Europe is at a major disadvantage. And we'll have to see how that works.
Yeah, we've even had some, some comments this week that US LNG that's coming out of America would usually be headed to Asia and Europe. That can Europe compete with Asia on that front? Of course, Russia is a huge gas supplier as well, and apparently, Sarah, I'll go to you with that. I mean, Russia apparently is maxed out at the moment, at least in terms of what it can supply to Europe with gas. And let's just talk a little bit about Qatar, because Qatar has also said, apart from reinventing its name to Qatar Energy from Qatar Petroleum in the last few days and launching itself as a cross energy company, but LNG in Qatar, first of all, they're saying they're unhappy with these high prices from a consumer point of view. They don't want to upset their consumers, and they're maxed out. How soon could Qatar bring extra supply onto the market, and what impact would that have?
Well, it is true they have maxed out, and as you know, to bring more LNG into the supply takes time. I don't think the reserve base that they have at this point in time can support any increase. So it's a limited field, and they have only one gas field that can produce all that they are producing now, and it's not easy to get any additional LNG from that field. So I don't think you'll see much coming from there anytime soon.
Laurie, let's go to you and talk a little bit about gas. With all of the problems that Lebanon's having, I assume this has been put on the back burner, but it could have been a solution had things been done better. But where are we on the sort of Mediterranean gas story? And has that just completely been shelved for the time being? Or has, in fact, the crisis created impetus to revive the efforts there?
So, there were really great efforts in the East Mediterranean, and it is different from one country to another. So Egypt has never stopped working on its energy resources, on gas findings, etc. Israel has been continuing with the fields that it has. It's already too much that they have, because they cannot find the export or the markets for the already gas that they have. So they've been okay, we're fine with what we have. We need to create all the synergies and the dynamics to export our gas to the region and outside the region. In Lebanon, we were trying hard to have at least the first discovery. Syria, with all the problems that they have. Cyprus has discoveries, but again, no development or no production. So it was different. But at the same time, when all this energy transition issue came up, so you felt that, okay, so suddenly the region was oh, let's think about that again. And again, now you see with what's happening in Europe, picking up again, these okay, so maybe our gas could be a support for Europe. So I think we're in a state where this region is really being reactive more than really planning for long-term, what to do. Again and again, we say it will be about regional markets. And that requires a lot of politics, a lot of peacemaking, a lot of collaboration, cooperation in the region, so that we'll be able to use that. And in case of these issues that are happening in Europe, that could be a support. But I don't think every year we will be having what we're having today in Europe, And I guess what is happening in Europe is a test for this whole energy transition issue. And from what I'm hearing, that the Europe today is taking lessons from this, and they're not going back. It's not maybe now shifting from gas to oil, to coal, but this is temporary. But from what I'm hearing now, they're more than ever insisting on pushing more for energy transition, or at least pushing more for renewables, so that they won't end up in this situation that they are in. So definitely the region is looking. But the region is looking to Europe, but I don't think that this is a sustainable way of looking at what we want to do in the region. Again and again, it is about regional collaboration, and that takes more than finding gas. It takes other skills.
Yeah, and again, I mean, the whole triumvirate of Israel, Cyprus, and Lebanon, again, there's arguments that, they should be developing their gas for themselves and just for the immediate region rather than looking to export it. Neil, I'd like to go to you on that question of energy transition. We saw a lot of momentum given to the discussions around that during COVID. There was time to think about it, time to people sort of, it seemed to get a bit of a boost there, regardless of oil prices dropping. Now we see healthy oil prices. The oil majors may have more money in their pockets to sort of push for that direction at the same, as well as pumping out more oil. But there's also the argument that because this current energy crisis has shown us that the energy transition is no way near ready to resolve immediate energy demand, and in fact we're moving too fast, and we have to keep the focus on conventional energy. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think the question is that the energy transition actually is not moving anywhere like fast enough, and I think my colleagues at the International Energy Agency are launching their World Energy Outlook today, and I think that's one of the key messages, that not enough is being done to invest in clean energy to prevent temperatures rising by, well, certainly the 1.5 degrees centigrade, forget it, that's already baked in. But we're looking now about the 2 degree centigrade increase. Now, as far as the transition is concerned, yes, I get it. It's necessary as a society. We need to do this. I agree entirely. The problem we have, and this is one of the problems that the international oil companies have got, is that there is a here and now. And certainly for the next decade or so, oil demand will continue to grow. Why? Because transport will remain overwhelmingly dependent on liquid fuels, whether it be passenger cars, aviation, shipping, trucking. And then, of course, we've got the petrochemical sector to support the production of consumer goods, which will be increasingly demanded by the peoples of developing countries whose incomes are rising. So we need oil for quite a long period of time to come. Somebody has to produce it. And to produce oil, you have to invest, not just to increase the production, but to maintain your existing production. And I think the international oil companies are in a very difficult place right now, because they are coming under investor pressure to do more as far as clean energy investment is concerned. And they're being criticized if they discuss investing in traditional oil and gas projects. And I don't think the international companies are doing enough to point out to the international community that, yes, we want the transition, but here today, there is a real world which continues to need oil and gas, and we are the people that can produce it and will continue to do so. So yeah, sorry, that's a bit of a rant, but I'm a strong believer in the transition, but I'm a strong believer also that we need to continue to supply our markets in the short and medium term with affordable energy that will continue to power economic growth and bring people out of poverty.
Well, I guess that's the delicate balance. Sarah, to go to you on that, I mean, the Gulf producers, the ones who have the revenue, are investing in new renewable energy in Saudi, the UAE, to an extent. But what about the argument that they're going to be phased, their advantage as conventional energy suppliers is in the end of its days, let's say. And how much is that pushing current OPEC policy? There's been a lot said about that in the last few months.
Well, firstly, I support everything that Neil said, because in order to get to this transitioned world, we need for the next 20 years to be growing oil and gas production. There is no two ways about it. So for us to stay here and demonize oil and gas and say, no, we don't need it, we transit. Yes, we will transit eventually. But for the next 20 years, we definitely need to invest in oil and gas. We do need this to support the world economy, to support our energy needs. So until this sinks into everybody's mind and heart, and this is very important. Now for this region, we all are on the wave band here for transition. Everyone is putting the plans, and we don't see this disconnect, because like I said, we know there is need for oil and gas for a long time to come, not in energy, probably, not like we are going to burn it in power plants and so on, but there is a versatile, huge amount of products that can produce from this, and there will be demand for this as long as the economies grow. But one thing there we forgot to talk about, I think, which is important, is Iraq. The elections in Iraq were successfully done, and I think there is a change in scene there. And Iraq is a country where it can really contribute to this business tremendously. And if you notice now, they've already signed something like 3-4 gigawatt of solar and renewable just over the last 1 month. So there is a dramatic change on the scene in Iraq, and I believe this is something that everyone should watch and see. Thank you.
And I'd say that was probably more of a medium-term hope. I mean, there are, yes, it had its elections, etc., but the inter-regional within Iraq, powers that be, I suppose, have to come to, and there's certain technical problems with exports, I believe, which have to be resolved. And just before we wrap up, we'll have a look at our poll. And I just wanted to go to Neil and Laurie just for one comment to close us off on inflation, how much that's factoring into thinking around the markets, what's driving it. Okay, fundamental shortage, 62% rather than forward demand. So that kind of falls in line with the fact that what Neil was saying is that now we're in a sort of moderate growth outlook, let's say, for the months ahead. Neil, just to go to you on that, and just in terms of inflation worries, how that's impacting thinking, on the energy markets. I mean, do you see inflation worrying enough to be denting that demand that we just looked at in that survey, or not? Will it actually have a negative impact on demand going forward?
Oh, well, it could. If costs do in various sectors of the economy do rise into 2022, it could have a direct impact. There's no question of that. But, look, from 2010 to 2014-15, nearly, we had the price of Brent crude averaging very close to $100 a barrel, and, we've had periods in the past where when I was a teenager doing O and A levels in England, we had nearly 30% inflation. So I think there's a little bit of perspective perhaps could be brought to bear here. While I accept there are huge difficulties in logistics and dislocations, I think over time those issues will be overcome. And so I'm maybe a little bit more sanguine about the inflation issue than some, but events are fast moving, so we'll have to see what happens.
Okay, and I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time very quickly. I'd like to thank Neil Atkinson and Sarah Akbar and Laurie Haydan. Happy birthday again. We couldn't go to you with an inflation question because Lebanon has its own crisis there, which is far more worrying than anywhere else. So best of luck with that. And thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing our viewers again tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.